the way that we, just to remind everyone, and to explain it a bit for those who just came, the way that we've organized the day, our time together, the days, is first to ask what theological education is for, before we start thinking about various models. If we're dealing with the problems, perhaps the opportunities that I raised initially. 48%, at least according to one statistic, 48% of Episcopal clergy right now are part-time rather than full-time. So does this mean then we will increasingly need to rely on some form of local or alternative style of theological education for our ordained leadership? If we're going to, then we started first by asking what a theological education is for, and we had two excellent presentations last night from Bishop Neal and Bishop George that pressed that in some very, I think, helpful ways. Now we're going to start thinking about different models and different programs that people from around the church have come up with for dealing with some of the same issues. And so this morning then, we are starting off with Dr. Garward Anderson from afar, the interim dean of Nashotah House, Dr. Jason Fout from Bexley Seabury, and then also Dr. Andrew Thompson from Sewanee, all of whom have something to tell us about the distance and hybrid learning programs that they are either organizing or involved with heavily at their seminaries. Let's see here. Dr. Jason Fout is the Associate Professor of Anglican Theology at Bexley Seabury. He's been there since 2009. As many of you will know, he is also the co-editor of the Anglican Theological Review. He was ordained in 2001. He is an Upper Midwesterner, as I understand it, who has served in Michigan and England and Ohio. He is interested in constructive theological projects, particularly Christology, the theological exegesis of Scripture, Anglican theology, theological analysis of the built environment, scriptural reasoning, and biblical theology. He's written a number of essays, and he also has a book on theological anthropology in light of divine glory in Karl Barth and Hans Urs von Balthasar. His PhD from Cambridge was in 2010 with David Ford. And interestingly, perhaps, for the question time, he also directs a class that he calls Learning from London, Mission and Evangelism in the 21st Century. Dr. Garward Anderson, who is not here with us, but is here in spirit, is interim dean and president of Nashotah House and also professor of New Testament. Previously, he taught at Asbury Theological Seminary, and before that spent a number of years in campus ministry. His PhD in New Testament is from Marquette, and his most recent publication is a major study in Pauline soteriology titled Paul's New Perspective, charting a soteriological journey. Now, I highly recommend it. I think it's excellent. He has written a number of articles and is also a regular contributor, I must not fail to point out, to the Living Church magazine and to our Covenant blog. Dr. Andrew Thompson is visiting assistant professor of theological ethics and the director of their non-degree theological studies program at Sewanee, at the School of Theology at Sewanee. His PhD in theological ethics is from Yale, where he wrote on a Christian ethical approach to mountaintop coal mining, which is recently published as a book by the University Press of Kentucky. As I understand it, this topic is near and dear to your heart and life as a native West Virginian. Is that correct? His interests also lie in the areas of international development and community-supported agriculture, in which he was led to go with his wife, the Reverend Lee Preston, to serve as Episcopal missionaries in El Salvador before he went to Sewanee. I think we have a great lineup, and I'm looking forward to learning about the programs at each of these schools. We will have a briefer question time at the end, but we'll have more time for that later on. Without further ado, Dr. Jason Fout.
Thanks very much. Can you all hear me? Yeah? All right, good. So I'm here to talk in particular about our program at Bexley Seabury. And I thought, just by way of getting to that, I might just give a little background history to this entity called Bexley Seabury. It started in 1824 with the starting of the second seminary of the Episcopal Church, Bexley Hall, in Ohio, on the campus of what became Kenyon College, on what was then known as the frontier of the United States. In 1968, then, after some turmoil and deteriorating relationship with Kenyon College, we moved to Rochester, New York, where we became a part of Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School. It felt a bit like the Seminary of Misfit Toys, an Episcopal seminary, along with a number of other ecumenical partners, a number of whom were actually escapees from other institutions. In 1998, then, 30 years later, after we first moved to Rochester, we opened a branch campus in Columbus, Ohio, returning back to our homeland, as we like to say, on the campus of Trinity Lutheran Seminary as a part of trying to work out the implications of Call to Common Mission, our agreement with the Lutheran Church. And then 10 years later, in 2008, in the wake of declining enrollment, we closed the Rochester campus. And so we had a single campus in Columbus, Ohio, where we shared space and curriculum, teaching duties with Trinity Lutheran Seminary. And then there's also Seabury Western, which itself was the consolidation of two seminaries. Seabury Seminary, which was started in 1858 in Faribault, Minnesota. It merged, and then also Western Seminary started in 1883 in Chicago. The two of them merged in 1933, and they had a joint campus then, or a single campus, near Northwestern University in Evanston, just outside of Chicago. Now, in 2008, in the wake of declining enrollment, they'd had, I think, a couple of years of 2, 3, 4 students coming in for the Master of Divinity. They stopped recruiting for the MDiv and completed the teach-out of that degree by 2010. A couple of the students transferred, a couple of them remained, and they had the teach-out and finished the degree there. In 2010, Seabury Western sold their campus, their land, to Northwestern University and moved to a facility out near the airport where we shared space at the ELCA Church Center in kind of an office park. Seabury was always sort of swimming upstream against the report that they had closed. They actually didn't close. They continued to offer classes toward the diploma in Anglican Studies and the Doctor of Ministry degree. But it was diminished from the MDiv that they had offered. The decision was taken in 2012 to federate the two seminaries. Now, Seabury had had declining enrollment. Bexley Hall had always been one of the smallest seminaries of the Episcopal Church, often with an entire student population of 10 to 12 across 3 years of a degree, with occasional transfers in. We had even a couple of years, recruiting years, of only 2 incoming students. It's not, even for a small place, it's easy to see that that's not sustainable indefinitely. So the decision was taken in 2012 to federate the two schools into one, to merge. We often avoid the term merger, but that's essentially what it is. It's a single institution now. And this new federation was then inaugurated in 2013 with Roger Furlow being brought in as president of the federation. After a few further years of consideration of the way that this institution ought to be shaped, and some fiscal realities as well, we decided that really the way forward for us was to consolidate the 2 sites we had, because we had been one institution with 2 sites, one in Chicago that offered the diploma and the Doctor of Ministry, one in Ohio that offered the Master of Divinity and the classes leading toward the diploma. Instead of maintaining 2 sites, we instead would consolidate at a 3rd site. And so we relocated then to the campus of Chicago Theological Seminary, a UCC seminary in Hyde Park. It's part of the consortium of theological schools in the Chicago area, and there's particularly a cluster in Hyde Park of seminaries that include Lutheran School of Theology, Chicago, and McCormick, which is a Presbyterian seminary. And so now, at the Chicago site, we offer the Doctor of Ministry, the Diploma of Anglican Studies, which, by the way, if you don't know, is intended to be a top-up degree. If you already have an MDiv or you're pursuing a Master of Divinity at another school, you can come and take a certain course of study leading toward a diploma, which will be in addition to that for ordination in the Episcopal Church. So we offer the Doctor of Ministry, the Diploma, and the Master of Divinity at the Chicago site now. Our Master of Divinity is actually a 3-year MDiv, accredited MDiv, and we offer it in conjunction with Chicago Theological Seminary. So we don't just share space with them, but they also help us to carry out our curriculum. They offer each of their courses both online and in person, and of course the online courses are particularly useful to us. And so at CTS, as I mentioned, we lease office space, we lease meeting space, we share some services, we use their chapels, we have library privileges with them, and we also continue to have library privileges with the United Library at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary as well. I've been a part of that seminary. I started at Bexley Hall in 2009. I've been part of it now for nearly 10 years, and I've seen all the changes. In fact, there's been pretty much so much change that I'm more or less the living memory of the place right now, which just boggles my mind. I sometimes say that means I have the license to make up stuff. Oh, well, we never did it like that before. I try not to abuse that too much, though. Since I've been there, at Bexley Hall and later at Bexley Seabury, there's been a keen sense that we've needed to change. And the staff, the administration, the faculty, we've all been adaptable and we've been willing to work at it. The administration and the faculty have not had a lot of resistance to this. We've been keen to take our curriculum and connect with more people to serve the church more widely instead of sort of huddling around our 10 to 12 students. But at the same time, it's been really clear, we've all been formed by the traditional residential model. Each of us had pretty good experiences with that. Each of us see real value in it, and we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so on the one hand, I'd certainly be one of the first to say that there is real value in maintaining a 3-year residential traditional Master of Divinity formation model in some way. And at the same time, we also need to think more expansively about quality theological education and connecting with more people who need it, especially for formation, for ministry, but beyond that, simply baptismal catechesis, which is vitally important and seems lacking when I think of the places where I am. Anyway, your mileage may vary. I'd love to hear counter-narratives. But we've been really clear then at Bexley Seabury that this is not a triumphalist move. We are not just the next thing that everyone else needs to catch up with. Rather, where we are in this place at this time, and perhaps it's significant that it's in the upper Midwest, this is what we're called to do. This is what we need to do in order to carry out our mission as this place. We think instead, to use the former Archbishop's phrase about fresh expressions of church, we think when it comes to theological education, there needs to be a mixed economy of education and formation for the whole church. Our greatest task set before us as Bexley Seabury is not competing with other seminaries, trying to be like them but better, but rather it's working to train people to serve the gospel wherever they're called by God. Now, in my doctoral studies, is it really that late? I'm really just kind of launching in. That's unfortunate. So, sorry. In my doctoral studies, I found myself actually at a university that was comprised of a number of ancient colleges. And the heritage of those colleges was near monastic. I say near monastic. Actually, all the ones that were founded before the Reformation started out as being, in fact, monastic. There was nothing near about them. But I discovered in conversation with a chaplain from one of the colleges that the these colleges, at least the way he put it, they think of themselves as places where students typically did three very important formative activities. And they study together, they pray together, they eat together. That's what happens at the colleges. That's what's essential about formation. And so along with living quarters at a college, there was also a library, a chapel, a refectory, and of course the college bar. Being what it is. But so then we at Bexley Seabury, we faculty administration who were formed by and valued full-time residential education, we began to think carefully about what a change would involve. We realized that if these really were the three most elemental functions of a seminary, of education broadly, then that gave us a sense of a core around which we could have some flexibility. So I'd like to use those 3 points then to explore what we do at Bexley Seabury and just present a little bit about how we think of the curriculum now, how we've gotten to where we are. So we offer our courses in one of 3 different formats. Again, this is a part of a 3-year MDiv. We offer in-person classes, which are on a hybrid format. In a hybrid format, we'll meet 3 times during a semester. We'll meet typically on a Friday after lunch, and we will go through about 3 o'clock or so on a Saturday afternoon. Again, we'll do that 3 times, and that's all the contact hours for a class. But in between those class meetings, work continues online. We also have in-person classes which are week-long intensives, and they meet Monday in kind of the late morning through Friday in kind of the late afternoon. And we undertake those sorts of classes in January and June terms. In part, we think that, in part that mirrors our Doctor of Ministry class, where classes meet during those 2 terms. But we also find that it's a little easier for people to get away for a week-long class during these times, June especially, I think. So hybrid, intensive, and then the third form is fully online. And these particularly are the Chicago Theological Seminary classes, Bible, some pastoral classes. We have a history class that we take through CTS. They're offered entirely online. Now, we're working our way up to offering these 2. We want to do so carefully and thoughtfully and responsibly. But we think that the MDiv also does require some sort of personal presence, not really face-to-face, which of course can be online as well, but in person with each other. And so I don't think that we'll ever move toward a fully online degree, certainly not as we're thinking about it now. That's not our intent. The online work that students do through Bexley Seabury is mostly what they call asynchronous, and for some that's just an obvious term, and for others maybe not. It just means we're not all online at the same time. And there are also occasional synchronous meetings, that is when everyone is online at the same time. You can see everyone face to face. There are also some synchronous sessions that we'll do with Zoom or other learning technologies as well. And in fact, that's one aspect of our field education course, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So these 3 formats then mean that we need to have pedagogical diversity and sophistication in the classroom. Now, don't hear me wrong, lecture is good and fitting in some cases. You're being very kind this morning. But the fact is, any of these 3 formats, just from the intensity of time that you're meeting together or it being entirely online, any of them would be pedagogically deadly if it were just a talking head. Now, so for hybrid and intensive courses, these formats provide all of the actual in-person instructional contact hours with students. So in that sense, technically they are no different than a traditional in-person week-by-week course. They're just more concentrated. So our MDiv is a 3-year, 81-credit degree. So far, so traditional. It's fully accredited by the ATS. It's licensed by the Illinois Board of Higher Education. The courses include the fairly traditional sequences of Old Testament, New Testament, systematic theology, church history courses. We have 2 liturgics courses, pastoral counseling, preaching. We have 4 courses in congregational development and leadership, and we have a number of electives, which include a course, I like to think it's in mission and evangelism, but it's also a cross-cultural immersion, a course called Learning from London, which was mentioned earlier. So this format, though, of classes, this format of the degree, allows students to remain in their original context and diocese while attending seminary. I like the way that we put it, I think, in our agenda for today, that it's learning from home rather than learning at home. I think that that's an interesting distinction. And field education is actually a very important part of our overall program. And the way that this works, it's suffused throughout the 3 years of the degree. Students find a field ed site in their diocese in conversation with the seminary and their bishop. And a field ed site it's typically a church, of course, but it also might be a chaplaincy or some other form of public ministry in which there might be supervision, formation, engagement with a community of people. And again, as I said, this takes place over the entire degree. We start out the first year, the student visits congregations and sites, and they undertake field education preparation in conversation with the ministries professors and their colleagues. Second year is a 10 hours a week of work in the church or whatever other site they're in. There are weekly class meetings then, which are done online, face-to-face, synchronously with the ministries professors in order to process and learn. There's a supervision agreement entered into by the student as well. And then the third year is intended to be a 15 to 20 hour paid internship in a congregation. This obviously takes a little bit more working. The idea, though, is that it's intended to be a partnership of the diocese, the seminary, and the church. There is, throughout that year, then also continued processing with professors and also with colleagues. And so overall, this idea of beginning from the very beginning, as it were, to be formed in your pastoral identity, to be formed in your identity as a leader, as someone with responsibilities and accountability in a congregation, this is intended to cast the student as someone who is an emerging leader, someone who's rooted in a particular congregation and context, someone who is engaged with the people there. Now, for the degree, the credit load that's usually taken is 10 to 13 hours a semester, with 3 to 6 hours then taken each June or January term. And the idea is that ideally, no more than 2 in-person classes are taken per term. Usually, the schedule is such that they have to take 1. That means that in a given semester, the students are only having to travel to in-person class on the seminary campus 3 times. They also come up for a formation retreat at the beginning of the term, which I'll talk a little bit more about imminently. And so the idea, again, is that students can remain in whatever their context is, whatever their setting is. They can, without uprooting themselves, still have the benefits of a full-time, rigorous, accredited Master of Divinity program, while attending to the other realities of life. For example, some have spouses that would need to leave work. Some are abstracted from the ministry context and so forth. We're actually working with a small group of Native Americans for whom that might be a particularly difficult situation to be abstracted in that way. Okay, so we study together. We also pray together. And of course, every seminary takes prayer seriously and does so in ways which are authentic to their identity, authentic to that community and their call. But if part of this function of seminary education is for students to pray together, then at Bexley Seabury, we've worked very hard to build that into our curriculum very intentionally. And so each semester begins with a formation retreat. And for that, all of the registered students and the ministries professors gather together. They meet from noon to noon. It's a 24-hour retreat, and it involves prayer, it involves worship, it involves sharing their lives and journeys. it's a good way to be clear about what we are about as we start the term together. And then, so every term starts with that retreat, but then also there's ongoing online conversation around a number of books and topics dealing typically with spirituality for ministry that take place throughout that semester, and they're chosen newly for each semester. That's a way of continuing that prayerful conversation that was begun at the beginning, and also a way then for the whole student body also to be together in person at the beginning of the term, but then to be together as we pray and think throughout the term as well. Inevitably, then, the first day ends with the students gathering, the first day of the formation retreat ends with the students gathering en masse at a local establishment that they have dubbed, inevitably, the student bar. So it rears its head here as well. Now, when the students talk about the formation retreat in particular, they've used words like sacred community. It's where they feel safe. It's where they feel at home. And I think that that's actually part of what we have tried to initiate and build into the system, but it's also a function of what they themselves have done, how they have leaned into and embraced the opportunity to pray together in deep ways, and to put that at the center of what they're doing as a student body. And now when classes meet, we also engage then in prayer and worship, the regular round of prayer and worship. We start with morning classes, we start with morning prayer, we have Holy Eucharist, we have Evensong, we have Compline. And all of them are led and staffed by students and faculty as appropriate. And so, again, praying together is a really central part of what we do at Bexley-Seabury. So we study together, we pray together, and we eat together as well. Since they're not together throughout the week, over the span of 3 years, we actually really need to be able to maximize the opportunities for socializing without being sort of manipulative or putting unfair expectations on people. But the students find, as indeed at any seminary, that they walk away with lifelong friends, supporters, and colleagues, people who will be essential to who they are and how they function in ministry afterwards. And so in-person classes then have scheduled breaks for meals. Some of the classes take advantage of that by having students bring in their dinner, and then there's some sort of a focused conversation on a topic as they eat dinner together. Other classes plan to have dinner after the day is complete, and so they will meet until 6:30 or so, and then most of the group then will go out to dine somewhere new. That allows them to get to know each other better in a relaxed social situation and to discover different neighborhoods of Chicago as well. And in that way is a kind of sinking down even more deeply into the context that we are in Chicago. Students have reported strong bonding with their fellow students during class meeting times. It's as if the socializing of a traditional semester, again, is concentrated into those in-person class meetings. So, why did we do this? Well, very simply, we did it to reach more people and to make seminary education available to a broader range of folks, and not only those going toward ordination, although that continues to be our core constituency and who we are considering ourselves as chiefly serving. Not having to uproot and move, we believe, allows for a wider variety of otherwise promising students to attend seminary and work toward an accredited MDiv. They can do that while their children remain in school, their spouse works, while they remain rooted in their ministry context. They don't have to leave what might be a settled and cheaper community to be uprooted to an unsettled and expensive community. And believe me, friends, Chicago, it's not New York or London, but it's right up there. They don't have to move to an expensive community only to turn around in 3 more years and move back. Now, in some cases, that also allows the student to continue working, at least part-time. And we have some students who do so. We have one who works for an insurance company, another who owned a business, a pet shop, actually. We have one who's an emergency room physician. We have someone who worked as a chaplain, someone who works as a teacher. But honestly, that is very difficult to do, and increasingly we discourage students from doing that. On the one hand, it's valuable because the reality of ministry, and again, particularly in the upper Midwest, is increasingly going to be bivocational ministry. And so to be able to have that that other source of income and sustenance is important. On the other hand, you simply can't expect to actually have a settled family life, a full-time career, and full-time graduate level education. It just doesn't work. Some people, one of my advisees is the ER physician. Some of the people simply have the energy and are in a place in their lives where they can do that. But I think we're finding more and more that that's the exception. The students we have come from across the church. They're not only local. We have some that come from Chicago, yes, but we also have students from Ohio, Southern Ohio, Indianapolis, Western Michigan, Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Iowa, the Central Gulf Coast, North Carolina, Arkansas, and Georgia. So we are pulling more and more broadly from across the church. Students who want to embrace this model of education and formation that allows them to pursue that accredited seminary degree with the full resources of the seminary behind them in their formation. They benefit from that wide fellowship of colleagues. They can be immersed in prayer and formation with these colleagues from across the nation, across the church. But they can also do so while continuing to be rooted in their context. They can do so, again, in the terms, we've said it this morning, from home. Some people want, need, and can do full-time residential education, and I bless the places that are able to do that. I think that is important and a critical part of our ecology of the church, and especially education in the church. But not everyone can do that. Some people want, need, and can do a local diocesan training school, and I think, again, that is a really important part of the ecology of education and formation in the church. But Bexley Seabury is for people who want the MDiv and the benefits of a traditional seminary, but who want to enjoy also the benefits of a local or diocesan school at the same time. The response to our new program has been substantial. In fall 2016, when we started at CTS, we had the largest incoming class in recent memory, thinking well over a decade previously. And then last fall, we doubled that. And we expect then to duplicate last fall's incoming class again this coming fall. And so, not that numbers tell the whole story, but clearly we're connecting with people and are being able to serve some people in the church who wouldn't otherwise be opting for traditional MDiv sorts of education. I could talk about communities of learning formation, but perhaps that's for another time. I would want to mention some challenges, and it goes back, I think, to, to Neil's very good point, I think, last night about convenience. This can look like a convenient option for people. Oh, okay, I can take it online. Okay, I only need to travel so much. I don't need to uproot. And the other side of convenience is sacrifice. And I think we do need to make sacrifice. That's simply part of being a finite creature. The challenge then for us is that because we're offering this degree in a way that students don't need to uproot, it can sound like it's a convenient option. And then they can think unrealistically, I think, that they can continue in a demanding full-time job, have a family, and also somehow shoehorn in some work online. There's something about being able to accumulate endless PDFs, for example, that make you think somehow that you're actually accumulating something. But without the actual time to sit down and process it, to get into a text, to really spend time on education, it's not really education without that time. And so we are finding sometimes that the form of the degree might need to be sort of corrected for in the way that we talk about it. It is something that allows you to do certain things, but it is certainly not convenient in the sense that, you can just, tick a couple of boxes on an online form and suddenly you have a Master of Divinity. It's every bit as demanding and rigorous as an in-person degree would be. And in some ways, because you're not uprooting and leaving the rest of your life, it actually can be even more demanding. as you need to navigate all of that around. I would also say then that's for the students. And then we also, again, in telling our story as Bexley Seabury, need to be clear that this is a accredited, rigorous Master of Divinity degree. I mean, this is real formative education. The fact is we lost a very promising student who had a full scholarship because his commission on ministry wanted him to go to a real seminary, a residential seminary. And so that's an area, I mean, certainly in which we were incredibly disappointed, but also we just needed to be able to better tell our story, what we're about, what we're doing, and its value to that diocese. And I think that's enough for now. There's always more that we can say, of course, but I think that's probably a good place to put a pin in it and hear from our colleagues about their programs.
Good morning. As Jordan said, I'm Andy Thompson. I direct the non-degree theological studies program at Sewanee, and I'll, of course, say more about what that involves. First, I want to thank Jordan for giving me this opportunity to share a bit about what we're doing in our program. I want to thank Jason for that explanation of what's happening at Bexley, and I'm looking forward to hearing in absentia from Garwood. And I also want to thank Bishop Alexander and Bishop Sumner for their points yesterday that I thought were really important perspective for all of this discussion, and certainly helped me clarify some of my thinking about our program. And I'm not just saying that because he's my boss. And so I think from Dean Alexander yesterday, you heard something of the vision that grounds the program that we have, which is to say, a strong commitment to the distinctive value of a residential seminary education, and continuing to see that as the norm for theological preparation for ministry, and at the same time an acknowledgement of the need for alternative models in exceptional circumstances. And that vision is what shapes our program, which is a hybrid program, and again, I'll explain more about that hybridity. But personally, for me, I'm going to say a bit about my commitment to this model of education, to what we're doing. I am a theologian, I'm an academic, I'm a professor, and so obviously I share that commitment to the value of traditional residential seminary education. And there are certain things about that I think cannot really be achieved in other models, or at least not to the same degree. And as Jordan mentioned, I'm from West Virginia. I grew up going to a small church. In my dissertation research, I spent a lot of time with small rural churches, usually with part-time or non-stipendiary ministers. And so I have a real commitment to those churches. I have a real love for rural places and for the church in rural places. And I think that's where, one of the places in particular where we're really seeing the need for these alternative models. And so my feeling is, as much as I wish that all of those churches could have someone who's been trained in a 3-year residential MDiv program, as long as it is the case that churches have to look to other alternative models, then we in our program are going to do everything we can to prepare them as well as possible to serve those churches. And as I say, that comes from not only a commitment to those people, to prepare them, the future ministers for that ministry, but to those churches and to the church as a whole. I think that it's a service that we owe to those churches. So our program, the non-degree theological studies program, it began at the request of some of our owning dioceses, precisely out of this need, the recognition of a need for alternative models for ministerial preparation for ordination. And so it developed, because of that, it developed as a partnership with the diocese. It's not a degree, in contrast to what Jason just described. It's there in the name. It's the non-degree theological studies program. And so we don't offer a degree, but what we do is we partner with the diocese to handle the various aspects of formation for ordination, drawing on the respective strengths of each side. And the seminary, building on what is most distinctive about the seminary, what we can offer, and letting the diocese do what the diocese does best. We're also clear in this that it is intended for specific circumstances. Again, as you heard from our dean yesterday, we continue to have a commitment, a belief that the residential MDiv remains the best preparation for most full-time ministers, but for people for whom their bishops decide that that is not a feasible option for whatever reason, and typically those are going to be people going into bivocational or unpaid positions in small parishes, when the bishop, in conversation with us, determines that an alternative model is needed, that's what this program is for. And so it continues to be a collaboration, a conversation with the bishop, with the diocese, to make sure that we're meeting all of the needs and building on those respective strengths. The diocese typically contributes the spiritual formation, the field ed component, some of the more practical aspects of that formation, as well as ideally some mentorship or continuing guidance for these students. And what we contribute is the academic portion of that preparation. So the structure that we've developed with respect to that is based primarily on the canonical areas. We do 8 modules, Old Testament and New Testament, with a preaching component in each of those, ethics and moral theology, theology, history, prayer book, pastoral theology, and then ministry and contemporary society, which is the 6th canonical area that's sort of a grab bag of a number of things. And in that is where we also try to incorporate what we see as some of the most important practical skills specifically for small congregations. And again, I'll say a bit more about what I think those are. But that's where we try to give them tools that we think they're really going to need to be prepared to serve the congregations where they, in some cases, are already serving, or certainly where they're preparing to serve. As I say, this is meant to draw on the real strengths of seminary, many of those that Bishop Sumner articulated yesterday, the benefit of having access to a full faculty that can cover the wide variety of theological topics, and do so in conversation with one another. As it's currently constituted, all of our modules are taught by Sewanee faculty, so these students have access to the same professors that the MDiv students have. Also, the time away from the place of origin in community, and I'll say in just a minute, I'll say how our structure tries to meet that need. Also, the academic standards. So because we have seminary faculty teaching in our program, one of the things that I think we have done really well is we've been able to maintain a high academic standard. We've been able to maintain expectations that are demanding, are rigorous, and it's one of the things that we keep hearing from students in our program that will tell us how challenging they found it, coming from a wide variety of backgrounds, some that don't even necessarily have bachelor's degrees, others that have PhDs. But they tell us that this is it's a rigorous, it's a demanding curriculum, and that's one of the things they value most about it. They have really appreciated that we have high expectations of them. And they get to benefit from the full resources of our seminary. So the program runs in the summer at the same time as our advanced degrees program, and then in the winter it runs at the same time as our residential program. And so when there are speakers, when there are lectures, when there are events, and of course we also have the benefit of having being attached to a university, so there's all the events that go on there. They get something of that when they're there with us for a couple weeks in January or a couple weeks in June. So the way we've structured this to try to give them as much of that residential seminary experience as we can and try to draw on those strengths. It's 4 weeks of residency a year. That's 2 weeks in June and 2 weeks in January. So typically, what students will do, they'll arrive, say they're starting in June, arrive for a week in June of intensive residency in 2 modules at a time. So 1 module for 3 hours in the morning, 1 module for 3 hours in the afternoon. After that intensive residency week, then they have 5 months of distance learning online. That can be asynchronous or synchronous. We have our own software, the Blackboard software that the university uses, that allows us to do sort of a GoToMeeting, Zoom kind of thing. And we're working to really try to take advantage of that, but we also do the asynchronous bit where they'll submit papers and have online discussions. Then they return for an intensive week at the conclusion of those 2 modules, then stay on for a second week in January, which is the beginning of the spring term, then another 5 months of online in return for that conclusion. So it totals to 4 weeks residency, as I say, at which time they're interacting with residential students in the MDiv program or in the advanced degree program, and have access to community worship, and we encourage them to participate in all that, as well as the life of the seminary community. The bishop spoke yesterday about this need for sacrifice, about the importance of people being removed from their communities of origin, coming to this residential community, being a part of a different community, and how important that seems to be to formation. And I want to say just a bit about that. We actually had a student who finished the program just recently, and I was getting some feedback sort of informally, and asked her about it, and she said, 4 weeks is tough. 4 weeks is a challenge. For some people, it's all of your vacation. For some people, it's all of your vacation plus your sick days. It's difficult for most of these people who are staying in their jobs to do. And she said, and I'm absolutely glad that that's the way it is. I don't think that you should reduce that residency at all. She saw that the residency, the participating in community, but also that sacrifice, the challenge of having to make that sacrifice, of having to give up vacation time, to give up other things that she might have desired, as really part of her formation, and is a valuable part. That also speaks, I think, to the quality of the students that we have had in our program, and I just feel like I have to say something about this. I came to this director position after teaching in the program in a couple of modules, and from the start was just really struck by the high caliber of students we were getting. As I say, from a wide range of academic preparation, and so not all of them were on the same page in terms of their ability to do the academic work, although many of them quickly got there. But just the diversity of experiential backgrounds that they brought to this, and the commitment that they have to the ministries that they are preparing for, or in some cases already participating in. It was a real joy to teach these people, and that too has contributed to the strength of this program. And they are, I think, making sacrifices. They don't pack up and move for 3 years. They don't make all the same sacrifices that someone in a residential program might make. But most of these students have full-time or at least part-time jobs that they're remaining in. They're giving up vacation time, they're giving up time with their families, and they really are subjecting themselves to a very demanding preparation, and for what's going to be a very demanding ministry. And we respect that, we honor that. And I think, again, that is an essential part of their preparation, of what they're doing. So I'll say a bit now about some of the challenges that we face in this program, and hopefully about how we're trying to address those. But generally, just this hybridity itself is a challenge. As everyone in this room knows, the via media is sometimes a difficult line to tread. It presents us with a number of tensions, a number of tensions that we have to try to negotiate, and many of these were spoken to last night, and Jason addressed some of these as well. So first, the matter of partnering with dioceses. Of course, dioceses are in a number of different places in terms of their preparation, how they prepare people for ministry, the formation that they do. And so we have to be in constant communication with them to ensure that all aspects of this student's formation are being covered. We don't, as I said, we don't currently offer field ed or spiritual formation or the other parts of that for this program, but we have to work with dioceses to make sure that all of those things are being addressed, because some dioceses are just have more infrastructure in place to do that. And so communication with the diocese is key, and it's something that we're continuing to improve to make sure that we are meeting all those needs, that they really are getting a well-rounded preparation and formation. On a related note, there's this tension between making it accessible, being as flexible as possible, recognizing the needs that people have, and this need for sacrifice, that it shouldn't be too convenient. Of course, we don't want to cheapen it for some of the examples that have already been cited, we don't want to cheapen it for every 25-year-old who comes in and simply wants a convenient way to become a minister, or as Jason said, just want to check a few boxes so you can get that preparation. At the same time, we don't want to be an obstacle to someone who has a real vocation, and because of these extenuating circumstances is simply unable to commit to a residential MDiv. We don't want to force someone to choose between their family and their calling. We don't want to, we want to be able to reach people who don't have 4 or even 3 or 2 weeks of vacation that make it easy to get there. And so we're continually trying to find ways to make it accessible without sacrificing the real distinctive values of a residential seminary education. And again, because we want to serve those people and we want to serve those churches. If there are cases where this is the only way that some rural church with a ASA of 15 or something is going to get somebody, we want to make sure that we're filling that need. And here I also want to just note, as another tension, another thing that I think we need to stay on top of, that we need to be aware of, is the gender and age disparity and aspect of this. That in many cases, it seems that these kind of jobs go disproportionately to older people who come to their ministry formation later in life, and often to women. And at the same time that we want to serve them as well as we can and give them the best preparation, the best formation that we can, we also want to make sure that we're not just facilitating that kind of disparity. And as I say, I don't know the solution to that. It's just something that I think we need to be aware of. We need to stay on top of to make sure that we're not just encouraging that kind of disproportionality. And my friend Emily Walkner was actually one of the people that first pointed this out to me as something that we need to be attentive to. Another tension that this hybridity raises is the tension between, as was spoken to last night, between the real theological foundation and giving people the practical skills that they need for their ministry. And I think this is particularly urgently felt by some of the people that come to our program, because they're already working in congregations. They're going to be going to congregations that, where there's not a whole lot of room for error. They're in sometimes difficult situations, and they have very limited time to give to their congregations. And so they come to us feeling a real urgent need for particular practical skills. What are you going to give me that's going to help me keep this church going, going to help me even grow this church? And we want to respect that. We want to serve that. And as the dean was saying yesterday, as it was both bishops were saying yesterday, that has to have a real solid theological foundation. Those skills are important, and they only get you so far. And there needs to be that theological foundation that is the heart of an MDiv. And in our program, we're trying to be as thoughtful as we can about continuing to meet that need. The TLC, the Living Church articles that Jordan mentioned yesterday by G. Jeffrey McDonald give some great anecdotes about small congregations with part-time or unpaid clergy, some of which are really thriving, some of which have done really well. And so we want to be thoughtful about what skills are needed for that. We want to try to, and of course we don't know exactly what skills those are, but we're trying to understand as much about what those skills are so we can prepare people for that. In that respect, there's also the task force on small church ministry and formation that was formed by General Convention in 2015, and their research has really been invaluable too in trying to articulate what specific skills people in these congregations are going to need. And as I say, at the same time, we can't go too far in that direction to where it's coming at the cost of a solid theological foundation, because those skills have to be built on something. Communication, preaching, evangelism come across as really important skills, especially in small congregations, of course, in any church. But you also have to have something to say. There has to be that theological grounding that you have a message. You've got something to evangelize. And additionally, we as I say, we try to focus on skills that people need for these small churches, but we are not training them to be small church priests. We're training them to be priests. And in some cases, they will, in some cases, they'll stay in these small congregations their whole lives. In some cases, they'll go on to other ministries. And so we can't be so focused on that small church ministry that we're not preparing good, well-rounded, theologically grounded priests. And so just a couple of ways that I think we're trying to negotiate these tensions. I don't think that they can necessarily be resolved. I don't know if they should be resolved because, as I say, we're trying to hold together, these two sort of sets of values. We're trying to hold together the value of a residential seminary while being flexible, while meeting some real urgent needs. But the ways we try to negotiate these values, first is having a faculty that is really on board with all of this, a faculty that understands the particular circumstances that we're trying to speak to and understands the value of full-time residential education. And I've been fortunate, I've been in my position just for a few months now. I've been fortunate to step into a program that already, for the most part, had a faculty that shared that vision. And we've been able to communicate that with one another and really to all be on the same page in that regard. And we also need to continue to be intentional about maintaining that vision, maintaining that shared idea of what the program is. That includes the digital piece, and I'm grateful for Dr. Duncan, is it? The comments that you were making yesterday. I'd be very interested to see some of your research, because we want to be as intentional and thoughtful about incorporating that digital piece as well. I confess that I'm maybe a little bit more like Bishop Sumner, that I tend to be very wary of the quality of community and communication that can happen online. And I know that it's absolutely essential, and that it really can make for, if we're thoughtful about it, can make for a more effective pedagogical experience. And so that's one area that we're really trying to develop, that we've got a long way to go, but we're working on it. And then more generally, I think the other way that we try to negotiate these tensions, try to address this, is having a clear sense of the identity of our program and the distinctive ministries that we are trying to serve. Of course, the people that we are training, we're training them to be priests. We're not training them to be small church priests. We're not training them for a different kind of vocation, but we are training people who, as I say, whose bishops have, and dioceses and the people themselves have discerned a particular shape to that vocation, at least at this point, that they are going to be serving in small churches. And for that reason, we've tried to shape the program and continue to try to shape the program to have a clear view of that ministry and of the distinctive contribution that these people and these churches make to the broader church. Bishop Sumner yesterday cited this idea that the vitality of the church is in local communities. And as I say, this article in the Living Church points to some really vital, vibrant, small churches that have been able to maximize that vitality. And that's what we have to keep in mind, that whatever the circumstances that lead to these situations, we can see these as vital and essential parts of the broader church, and that they have a distinctive contribution to make. And we try to help our students share that vision. We're still clarifying that vision. We're still trying to understand precisely how to do that and how that helps us negotiate these various challenges. But I think some sense of that vision, some sense of the positive contribution of these small churches, the essential gift that they are to the broader church, is what has to guide us as we try to negotiate those questions. Thank you all.
Morning, everyone. Well, so I get to speak in persona. Woody Anderson, the Dean of Nashotah House, which is kind of fun. And I'm going to insert all kinds of sentences he didn't write, and then you can guess which ones he wrote. Just joking. But I'm already learning a lot. Great presentations, Andy and Jason. Thank you. And I think it'll be interesting to hold this session in close right alongside with the next session. So the seminary from home, seminary at home. And it's really interesting to me to see how the old seminaries are kind of developing new programs and kind of reinventing themselves to meet this need. And I think it's clear that we're in a kind of constructive, creative flux and moment in our church. And one of the themes I think that's emerging from the conference is the need for bishops and dioceses and then traditional seminaries to work closely and creatively together. And so I'll just be interested to see as this conference continues to unfold how all we can learn from each other. But so this is another slice of exactly what we just heard, really, from Bexley Seabury and Sewanee, of a kind of traditional seminary reinventing itself to meet these distance learning needs. And so now I'll stop speaking my own voice. He says that he regrets he couldn't be here and that he's grateful to me for speaking for him and that he doesn't hold me responsible for these reflections. So, Nashotah House, an unlikely advocate for distance learning. He's a kind of a lively writer, you'll be glad to hear. So, several of our presenters enjoy an aerial view of theological education and ministerial formation, and this conference benefits from that discussion of trends and paradigms. My engagement with non-traditional forms of ministerial formation is personal and anecdotal, having been a beneficiary of it, a participant in it, and now something of a steward over one of its expressions. So he begins with autobiographical reflections. It turns out that though I hold a seminary degree, as such things go, a fairly hefty one with 87 credit hours, a day's worth of comprehensive exams, and a 120-page thesis. He's a layman, by the way. I have never been a full-time seminary student. I began those studies in summer of 1986 and finished in 1997, which probably competes for some kind of record as the MA degree of longest duration. I was a commuter. I drove to class and drove away most days without speaking to anyone, being more of an observer and visitor, without having spoken up in class. I cannot say that my seminary formed me, nor do I judge my alma mater for that, since I had no interest in formation from a seminary. The, quote, goods of the seminary were in the classroom, the professors, the library, and in a small percentage of the smarter students. In that sense, I attended seminary as an unrepentant consumer. I remember having to fill out some kind of form to certify something I did in practical ministry, and being annoyed that it should be any of their business to check up on me that way. I went to, quote, chapel two times over 12 years. Once to hear Kevin Van Hooser lecture on Paul Ricoeur, and the other one I don't remember. It was some kind of a sermon. It is only natural, then, that someday, no doubt for my sins, I would become the dean of Nashotah House, where we observe Lent year-round, and where... and where any, quote, formation is a euphemism for anything we don't like or that doesn't work well. I tell that story to make this point. Those 12 years while I was eschewing formation at the seminary were the most spiritually formative of my adult life. But the seminary had no significant part in it, other than the intellectual bit, which was in its own way transformative. I was engaged in full-time campus ministry, exercising enormous autonomy while being under rather close reflective supervision. I had spiritual directors and mentors. I belonged to a team of bright and talented peers. I read voraciously outside of the classroom with other readers. More important than any of that, I was daily engaged in leadership, evangelism, pastoral care, and above all, the formation of university students. So I eschewed the seminary's opportunities for, quote, spiritual formation because they were lackluster and non-robust. I am a poster child for informal or non-formal modes of spiritual formation. Even while I currently exercise stewardship over a seminary with arguably the most self-conscious, self-assured, and prescriptive mode of Christian formation. Moreover, I am a convert to my institution. By and large, I am a true believer in the warp and woof of what my seminary does, intellectual community saturated in the daily Eucharist and the daily office, time punctuated by the Angelus, and worship suffused with the beauty of the Anglican choral tradition. All of the faculty and all of the students unfailingly present for all of it as a matter of first importance. Oh, and we offer classes also. Or as I frequently put it, we file into classrooms to understand what we were just praying and return to St. Mary's Chapel at the end of the day so that what we are learning might properly redound in the praise of Almighty God, hearts full. A professor, say, of New Testament, hopes and prays that the lecture on Luke and eschatology will transform the evening chanting of the Magnificat into a Christologically modulated yearning for justice, at once cruciform and anastatic. And the historical theology professor will be quick to point out what a difference a little iota made to our worship this morning as we confess the consubstantiality of the Son with the Father. In between, there's breakfast and lunch and dishes and work crew where students and faculty engage in small talk and sometimes consequential conversations and clear each other's dishes and wash pots and pans as a single community in Christ. This is the residential parenthesis in his talk. Well, that's the idea, and it is also pretty much what happens, though not unerringly and most certainly not automatically. We have certain remarkable students who manage to resist the irresistible. This way of doing seminary is not a system that produces results. It's rather an ecosystem in which the Spirit broods as welcomed into the community. So I wax wistful over this ideal of intensive residential seminary formation, not in some naive support of the way we've always done it, nor even less to be boorish in the midst of a conference exploring alternatives, but rather to say that one could uphold this ideal while yet admitting that there are other ways. Indeed, to admit as much ungrudgingly. I also begin, as I have, to help articulate why Nashotah House chooses to do its non-residential programs the way we do. So here's the non-residential part. Nashotah offers 3 degrees and 1 certificate program through its hybrid distance learning program. It's very interesting to compare this to the other 2 we just heard. There's a lot of similarity, I think, with Sewanee. Our newest program is the Masters of Pastoral Ministry, a 72-hour program, which is a substantial but abbreviated alternative to the MDiv. Parentheses, for us, 90 hours done in residence. Second, our original program was the Master of Ministry, which is a 48-hour program that picks up each of the 7 canonical areas of study. This is a degree used by vocational deacons, in some cases candidates for the priesthood, and intrigued laypersons. Third, the MTS degree, also offered in our residential program, is a 60-hour academic degree, normally terminating in a summative project such as an academic thesis. And fourth, we offer a certificate of Anglican studies consisting of 30 hours of focus on liturgy, ascetical theology, Anglican church history, Anglican theology, and Anglican ministry. We are, in fact, right in the middle of a significant tweaking of all of our hybrid distance programs to make each program as distinctive as possible, as integrated into the life of the institution, and as student-friendly as possible. That work will be done by this summer. And now, quite similar to what Andy did, GAR just has 2 discussions. One is Nashotah's commitments in terms of values here, and then liabilities, getting into some of the continuing learnings and problems with this as they make this up. So Nashotah's commitments. First, hybrid. Nashotah does not have a distance education program, but rather a hybrid distance program. What I mean is this: the distance program requires 1 week intensive residential weeks in which the students participate in every dimension of our normal residential life. Daily Eucharist, the office, common meals, service, and social events. With 10-hour-long days and 30 hours of direct instruction, not without reason, these weeks are called intensives. Having taught a few dozen purely distance courses myself, it makes an enormous difference to engage one another synchronously or asynchronously, online having spent a week in close community with faces and personalities to go with comments. Second, curricular integrity. What I now describe as a value is probably better described as an aspiration, namely that we seek to maintain curricular integrity of the distance classes so that they are comparable in rigor and outcomes with the residential programs, very similar. thread here. We want students taking comprehensive exams or GOEs or diocesan canonicals to be as well equipped for this from the distance courses as they would be from the residential. This is not as easy to do as one might imagine. There is a psychological barrier that kicks in with some students who, having elected a more, quote, convenient educational alternative, are surprised by its rigor. Our faculty uphold high standards, but we are also keenly aware that some pedagogical shrinkage is an ever-present temptation. Third, crossover community. Nashoda's first experience with hybrid distance learning. This is kind of interesting. I don't know if we've heard this theme yet. First experience with hybrid distance learning revealed a clear fissure between our residential community and the visiting community of distance learning. To the distance learners, the residential students were dinosaurs, fools for doing this the expensive way when there was an easier alternative. Worse, our residential students regarded the visiting distance students as pseudo-seminarians, weekend warriors who interrupted the community's routine existence and introducing a week of koyanis grazi, life out of balance. A stinging but illustrative comment of one of our students summarized the resentment of residential students. Upon watching a distance student drive off in a BMW Z3, the residential student drolly commented, "That's a lot like the car I sold to come to seminary." Zing. Through much hard work and not a little formation, we are currently turning the corner on this, such that our residential students frequently declare their excitement for the addition of the distance learning students and are eager to host them with social events in their honor. On balance, our distance students are more diverse in gender and theologically, spanning to the right and to the left of our residential community, and usefully upsetting the apple cart and testing the reality of the Benedictine charism. Fourth, faculty development. One of the serendipitous outcomes of hosting a hybrid distance learning program is the fact that we do not have quite enough faculty resources to cover the whole curriculum without throwing our residential faculty into an outrageous overload. We are generously supplemented by highly qualified scholar priests or alternatively underemployed professors, and we are proud to have them on our team. Although we try to keep a substantial offering from our full-time faculty, it turns out that in many cases, no less or even more qualified adjunct and affiliate professors are able to offer courses equal to or surpassing our residential faculty. It is a tremendous benefit to the seminary to have these friends on our team, and it creates opportunities for a more expansive institution. And his final short bit here is liabilities, distance liabilities. So first, easy community. This is a theme we've been hearing, I would say. We have proven, and aren't alone in doing so, that the choice is not between residential seminary as a high community affair and distance learning as an act of isolation. Not so. Before I had taught a single course as a tenure-track professor, I had taught about 15 distance or hybrid courses, and I can vouch that the community life is very rich indeed, normally quite affirming, and all the more with a cohort model, like both of you were saying. Residential experiences do not in themselves guarantee any particular community experience, even if we would agree that it is a fertile environment. That being said, the sort of community formed, this is the cheeky part, that being said, the sort of community formed in distance and hybrid contexts lacks an essential ingredient, quote, the dog shit factor. What I mean is this. Invariably, someone in our residential community is careless about canine feces, probably in 0-degree winter. And invariably, some child walks or falls in it. And there is a big brouhaha in the community. And you have to face the fact that you worship, study, and are preparing for the priesthood among idiots who can't even pick up their own damn dog shit. This is not the kind of community that forms in a week of church camp, lovely though that is. And it is closer to the kind of Christian community one will inhabit for the rest of one's ordained life. A community in which one does not need to, quote, bear up with the other is undoubtedly more enjoyable, but it is also less formative. 2, convenience. Make no mistake about it, a distance learning student is working his or her butt off. We make sure of that. The vast majority of our students want something rigorous and substantial. At the same time, the choice of a more convenient path toward ministerial formation sometimes infects the approach of such students to the formation process. Having found a path of less resistance educationally, they are sometimes inclined towards paths of least resistance in general. As one of my weightlifting friends often reminded me, quote, if you want to be strong, you have to lift something heavy. It is incumbent on bishops and COMs who make good use of the low residence alternatives that they own this tendency and be careful in making formation accessible, not to make it insipid. And third and finally, narrow exposure. It might seem especially rich for the Dean of Nashotah House to worry that its students might not have a wide enough exposure, but indeed I do. What I mean is this: students in a residential program are obligated to encounter a breadth of theology, churchmanship, and temperament. This is not because residential programs are broader by definition, but because it is too hard to sequester oneself from those who are different than oneself or one's sending parish or diocese. It seems to me that diocesan-centered, diocesan cooperative, or even distance learning alternatives run that risk. The familiar problem of the echo chamber. The comfort that one enjoys in being among the like-minded proves ephemeral as one exists in a church that is almost certainly broader than one of its local manifestations. In the Nashotah House residential program, there is everything from a Pusey Guild, that is SSC in training, to a Tuesday evening reading group devoted this semester to Desmond Tutu, Cynthia D. Mo Lobita, Kelly Brown Douglas, John Sabrino, and Elizabeth Edmond. And some of our students are members of both groups, while none of our students has the luxury of avoiding the other. I worry that the kind of charity that can only be forged over the long, sometimes maddening haul, bearing up with one another, is lost when communities are formed of convenience. Here's his final paragraph. I have then a single dean's desideratum. If we are going to exploit the rich resources of a distance learning alternative, and I believe that we absolutely should, it seems to me that it is incumbent upon the users, bishops, dioceses, and students, to ask, what doesn't this do for our ordinands? And then supply what is lacking with regard to Christ's afflictions, so that the church might train herself to be whole. We are on that project with you. Help us to do it better.